Welcome back to Crosties. We're excited to have you join me for this tasting. And the theme for this kit was blending. This is kind of a window into what we do here at the winery and what my job really entails, especially this time of year. So right now we're preparing to blend our red wines, the 2019 vintage. But really every wine that we have here is blended. It's an important part of the winemaking process. It's how we have control and some input into the wines we make. So whether it's blending a single varietal from different fermentations or different barrels, or like we're gonna have today, different blends of different grapes. So this is 3 different styles of blending, 3 kind of methods that we use, and hopefully you get a feel for why we have the grapes that we have planted here and how we turn them into a wine in the expectation for the finished product. So we're going to start with the Joy White. This is our most popular seller. This is the wine that we make the most of every year. And it is a blend of Vidal Blanc and Treminette. Vidal Blanc and Treminette are both French-American hybrids. They really do a great job growing here in the valley. They're a lot easier to grow than some of our other wines, some of our other grapes. But at the same point, that allows us to have tighter control on when we pick and how we blend and how we actually make this wine. So it's an opportunity to have a little bit more control than just what nature gives us. Vidal Blanc is known for its acidity and some of its fruity pineapple, apple flavors that you get from the wine. It can be a wonderful backbone to a white wine, and that's why we chose it to grow here. But then Treminette, at about 30% of the total blend, it changes year to year based on taste, is nice because it brings really, really intense aromatics. Its parentage involves Gewürztraminer, which is an aromatic grape from Germany or eastern France, so the Alsatian region. And so what you get from Treminette is an absolute just a bombshell of floral notes. As it ferments too, you get some really interesting brown spice, some nutmeg that comes from that as well. Treminette can be a little lacking in the acidity department, but that's really what makes it such a good pairing for the Vidal Blanc. Vidal Blanc has great acidity, and Treminette really can help tone the acidity and complement the aromatics. So the wine, stylistically, what we look for is a wine that's very juicy, and for that we look for that acidity. That's kind of really the core part of making this wine. The way we tell acidity from bitterness when we taste a wine is acidity leaves the mouth watering, bitterness leaves the mouth dry. So this wine has some sharpness on the palate, but you'll notice that when you're finished drinking the wine that your mouth is watering. And that mouth watering acidity, it makes this wine really refreshing. It really makes you want to go back for that second sip, and that's what we look for. Another consequence of that high acidity is that we need to balance it a little bit. It can be a little too sharp, a little too aggressive, and really the best way to deal with that for us is residual sugar. So there's a little bit of sweetness, just about 1.5% in this wine. Obviously we do it based on taste every year when we do the blending, but that is in order to achieve that perfect balance between a wine that's still juicy and mouth-watering, but has some nice balance to it as well. And how we achieve that residual sugar starts in the vineyard. We really start this blend when the grapes are still on the vine. And we do that by selectively picking the Vidal Blanc. We'll pick it 3 to 4 times each year. So we'll start in the middle of September and we won't finish until the first week of October. And what that lets us do is have grapes that don't have a lot of sugar, so not a lot of potential alcohol. And we'll ferment those totally dry, and that's where you get those really interesting apple and pear aromas. The middle pick towards the end of September will have a lot more sugar and some more riper aromas. And when I say ripe, so it's more like kind of think of a green apple versus a red apple. So we start getting into more of those sweeter fruit aromatics. And it also provides kind of the alcohol that we're looking for in the wine. We like the alcohol right around 12.5% for this wine. And then the last picks are so sweet, the grapes themselves are so sweet that we actually don't even ferment them all the way to dry. So when we say dry, that means no sugar left in the wine. We ferment them until they have about 40 grams to 50 grams per liter of sugar left. And then we'll turn on the cooling on our tanks and get the fermentation to stop. And at that point, we start taking, some pick one, some will pick two, some will pick three, and then also the Traminette, which also gets picked in two different fermentations. So we'll ferment one Traminette really cool, try to maintain some more of those floral aromas. One of the Traminettes will ferment at a higher temperature, and that gives us some more of the interesting spicy notes. So we kind of take all 5 of those wines. Some years it's 6 or 8 different wines that we make separately, and then we start to build the blend for Joy White. So what you'll notice with the aromas on this is a lot of that pineapple. I get some good green apple on here too, but the white floral kind of peachiness, that is Traminette's signature. And then on the palate, I think really you don't notice that acidity until you've swallowed it. You realize that this is a high acid wine, but it's so well balanced with the sweetness that it's almost electric. I call it the power of a wine. When kind of the components between the flavor, the acidity, the sweetness, and all of that kind of build on each other, and it's almost electric on the palate. And that's really what we look for. So this is a very crisp, very refreshing wine. The little bit of residual sugar is not to make it a sweet wine, it's to bring that acidity into balance. And that makes this a really versatile wine for having with food. It's a great palate cleanser. Anything that might be a little heavy or a little creamy, this is a wine that'll cut right through. And then that sweetness also really helps it balance some spicy notes that you'd get from like a hot pad thai dish or something like that. And because of all the components that we put into this wine, you can really see it evolve as it warms up. This wine is great coming right out of an ice bucket. It's great really cold. That's what Traminette does for us. The aroma is so powerful that it still can push through a really, really cold wine when normally the aromas are a little bit reduced. But the wine will reward you as it warms up as well. So I think if you're having it with like a creamy pasta dish, you might want to serve it a little bit warmer. But today, days like today, when it's 95 degrees outside, put it on ice. It has plenty of power. It'll be wonderful to enjoy completely on its own, nice and cold. So the second way we do blending is exemplified by our Fiore. This is the 2018 Fiore. Fiore means flower in Italian, and that's the name we have for our rosé. There's a few different ways to make a rosé. You kind of think, I think a lot of people when you first get into wine, you think that a rosé is white wine that you blend a little bit of red wine into to make it pink. And there is wines that are made that way. Typically they'd be called a blush. And then the other common way you'll see rosé made is that when they make red wine, they'll try to concentrate the flavor of a tank by taking some of the juice out of from the grapes, and that's called saigner, bleeding in French. So you bleed some of the juice out of the tank. It tends to be a little stained by the grapes that are inside that red wine tank. You do it very early in the process, so it's not red wine yet, but it's kind of this pink juice. And so that's a saigner rosé. Those can be very good. We do saigner here as well. Whether or not it mixes with rosé is kind of up in the air. Very rarely do we get a saigner that we enjoy as much as our rosé, because the ultimate way to make the rosé is a dedicated rosé. So this is from Chambourcin and Cabernet Franc. Both of the blocks of vineyards that go into making Fiore they begin the absolute beginning of the season being planned to be rosé. So none of these grapes were ever destined to be red wine. We grow them on the vine in order to make rosé. So part of that is that we manage how many leaves we pull, how much sunlight gets exposed to those clusters. It's really important in red wine to get plenty of sunlight to develop those right berry flavors and get rid of some herbaceousness, especially in a grape like Cabernet Franc. But we use Cabernet Franc in this wine because we like the herbal notes, some of the grassier herbal notes that it brings to the rosé. So it's important for us in the vineyard to make sure that we're trying to maintain those rather than burn them off with sunlight. At the same point, we pick them when they're not ready for red wine. We pick them when the acidity is perfect for making rosé. Because another thing with the rosé is how acidic it is. We want the acidity to be lively, have that same mouth-watering, delicious characteristic that we saw in the Joy White. And so we pick all of the grapes whole cluster by hand, And then from there, we don't treat them like red wine. They literally go straight into the press as a whole cluster. So we press this Fiore out as a pink juice. You can think of a white wine, which for all intents and purposes, the Fiore is, you make grape juice first and then you ferment that into wine. A red wine, you never see grape juice. It goes straight from a grape, you ferment the grapes, they turn into wine, and by the time you get to the pressing process later, you're pressing wine from the grapes rather than juice from the grapes like we do with white wines or rosés. The blending here is interesting because where this comes from is that we'll actually start the blending process at the juice stage. Over the last 10 years of making Fiore, we're starting to hone in on how we like to grow the vineyards, how we like the final blend to act. And so at this point, what we can do is really build the base of this wine together. So when the grapes are going into the press, it's 60% Chambourcin, 40% Cabernet Franc, roughly. And so we'll have a main tank of blended juice. And so the grapes live together as juice the entire process of the wine. We will ferment a little bit of extra Cab Franc or a little bit of extra Chambourcin on the side as a rosé, and see if we need to do a little bit of blending with that, and maybe get some more interesting components to bring to the wine at a slightly different fermentation temperature. But really, these are a field blend of grapes that make this wine. So what we look for is Chambourcin brings a lot of acidity, some really bright berry notes, some really good strawberry when it's in rosé form. And then the complexity, the interest of this wine comes from the Cabernet Franc that brings some slight dill and mint notes on top of the slight peppery grassiness that you get as well. So that's what we're looking for on the aroma. And so that undertone of that herbal really, I think, makes this wine interesting, makes it good to pair with food. But that's like a aromatic that we really don't look for in our red Cabernet Franc. So that's why it's so important that we start in the vineyard to make this wine. And on the palate, once again, we're looking for that bright acidity. Maybe has a little bit less acid, so it's got a little bit less sugar bringing it into balance. But it still has that wonderful mouth-watering character. Tons of that strawberry comes through. It's almost like a whole strawberry, that's how I describe it. It's not just the fleshy red parts, it's also, kind of the white part of the strawberry as well. And that's where that Cab Franc brings the interest. And then the final way we do blending is best shown by our Meritage. This is the 2017. And so Meritage itself, one, it's pronounced Meritage because it's actually an American term. There's a group of winemakers that came up with the term Meritage as a way to signify wine grown in America, made in America, that uses the 5 Bordeaux grapes. So in the region of Bordeaux, the traditional grape varieties are Cabernet Sauvignon, Cab Sav is king. You'll usually find that as a left bank wine, if you ever hear someone say that. Merlot, it's the left or right bank of the, I think this is the Gironde in Bordeaux. Now I'm embarrassed in case I got that wrong. So the left bank will grow primarily Cabernet Sauvignon. The right bank is more heavily Merlot. So those are kind of the 2 core grapes in Bordeaux. And then there's Cabernet Franc, which is the Cabernet Sauvignon's daddy. Petit Verdot, which they use in very small quantities in Bordeaux typically. Usually 6% would be about the highest you would see. And then finally Malbec. So here in the state of Virginia, we grow those grapes, but they act a lot differently here. So Meritage, it can only be called Meritage if it's made from only those 5 grapes. But the percentages change a lot when you're in a different wine region. We don't grow Malbec here on the estate, and we haven't seen a lot of success with Malbec in the state of Virginia. So we don't use any Malbec in our wine, in our Meritage. But Petit Verdot, Merlot, Cabernet Franc, and Cabernet Sauvignon all thrive. For us, the Merlot that we grow dedicated for Meritage production. Almost 100% of our Merlot will go to Meritage. Depends on the year. And then the core grapes for us here are also Cabernet Franc and Petit Verdot. So those percentages are much, much higher than you'd see and a French Bordeaux blend. So for us, Meritage is a signifier of the grapes, but it does not mean that this is a French wine. We really try to make it a really Virginia wine. And then Cabernet Sauvignon we use as well. So we grow it for our Meritage production as well. Merlot being the core of this wine, it's typically 30 to 50% of the wine. We look for fruit flavors, some really good, raspberry jam notes that we get from it. Merlot has a very refined tannin. It's never too bitter. In fact, we use some of the other grapes to try to kind of bolster the tannins that we get from Merlot, but it really provides kind of the fruit core for Meritage. After that, Cabernet Franc has some more of those fruit flavors, some more of those blackberry notes. We can get a lot more tannin out of the Cabernet Franc we dedicate for Meritage production. We really focus on exposing the clusters to sunlight to try to get them as ripe as possible. Petit Verdot, similar, but we get a whole different flavor compounds from Petit Verdot. It's more in the floral notes. You get some interesting graphite and shale notes from Petit Verdot as well. And then finally, Cab Sav. As rough as Petit Verdot can be, sometimes Cab Franc can be a little rough on the tannins. Cab Sav is a wonderful, rich tannins, but they're really, really smooth, and we kind of look at that as the velvet that levels out the entire palate. So that's kind of the concept behind how we blend it. But these are blended, rather than blended in tank or blended in the press, they're blended at the very last, very, very late in the process. So it'll be, 10 to 12 months of aging separately in barrel, completely separate from each other, and then we'll start to build a blend out of the barrel. On the aroma, for me, the first thing I pick up is that strawberry. For me, I have a strong memory of this cinnamon cherry yogurt, actually, that I had as a kid. And for me, it just identifies Merlot. So I can kind of pick Merlot out of any wine when it's there because it has this very strong flavor memory of a snack I used to eat as a kid. So the Merlot really comes through. It has some of that dark cherry, kind of the brandied cherry note to it. I get a lot of the Petit Verdot here as well, some of that graphite and floral notes to it. And the other thing you notice is oak. So this wine is aged in oak barrels, typically 30 to 40% new French oak. So when we say oak, even though all of the wine is aged in an oak barrel, you only get the flavor from a barrel that's brand new. That's the first time it's ever been filled. So when we say 40% oak, we're referring to 40% new French oak. It's really tight grain, slow extraction, very gentle barrels. We like the center of the forest and the center of France, specifically Allier and Trancé. They tend to make an impact on the wine at a very slow rate. So over the course of 12 to 16 months, that barrel will continue to evolve and give us the flavor. On the palate, what we're looking for is richness from those tannins. We don't want it to be too bitter and dry on the back end. And I don't think we have that at all here. It's actually wonderfully balanced up front. And the other critical component of this wine is its acidity. Acidity is what makes the Shenandoah Valley special. We have very good acidity levels in our grapes. They're easy to manage from an acid perspective, but at the same time, we don't get so flat that the wines lack the ability to age. So the 2017 was a very ripe year for us, but this wine still carries really nice acidity and means that it's going to really last in the bottle for at least 5 to 7 years, and who knows. And over time, what you'll notice is some of those fruit components that you're getting in the wine now, they start to diminish and the wine will develop its bouquet, its secondary aging characteristics. And that's when you get more of the floral notes, some more of those whiskey, vanilla notes will come through. So the wine will change and evolve with time, but we try to build it in such a way that it can. And so for us, that's the tannins, that's the acidity, and then try to bring the best components of each of the grapes here. Well, hopefully you guys enjoyed tasting with me today. I appreciate it. We are still doing free shipping on 6 bottles or more on our website, promo code CKV. We're excited to be open and entering phase 2 now, so please call ahead for a reservation, or they're recommended so we can get you seated in here. We have tons of space outside, lots of sunlight. It's a beautiful time to come drink a nice cold bottle of Joy White. And so as part of that too, now that we're kind of in white wine season, the next tasting we're going to do is going to be our Chardonnay, our Viognier, and our hops. So those are 3 white wines that pair well with an ice bucket, but hopefully I can tell you a little bit more about how we make those and why we're so excited for you guys to come back and join us out here. We thank you guys for joining me. Thank you.